Try to tickle yourself. Go ahead, do it right now. Run your fingers along your ribs, the bottom of your foot, anywhere that makes you jump when someone else does it. Nothing, right? You know exactly where your fingers are going. You know the pressure, the timing, the sensation before it happens. And somehow your brain cancels it out completely. But here's what nobody tells you about that simple fact. The reason you can't tickle yourself reveals that you are not experiencing reality as it happens. You are experiencing a prediction your brain made about 80 milliseconds ago. What you think is happening right now already happened. What you think is the present is actually the past. And your brain has been hiding this from you your entire life. Well, the first thing I have to tell you is that this is not some quirk of the tickle response. This is how your brain handles every sensation, every movement, every moment of your conscious experience. Let me tell you what's actually going on. When you move your hand to touch your ribs, something remarkable happens in your brain before your hand even gets there. Your cerebellum, sitting at the base of your skull like a wrinkled walnut, makes a prediction. It takes the motor command, the intention to move, and it calculates what sensations should result from that movement. Where your fingers will land, how much pressure, what texture, the timing of contact. All of this happens below conscious awareness faster than you can think about it. And then, when your fingers actually touch your ribs, your brain compares the real sensation to its prediction. If they match, if the sensation is exactly what was expected, your brain does something extraordinary. It suppresses that sensation. It turns down the volume. It treats expected sensations as unimportant, as background noise not worth your attention. This is called sensory attenuation, and we can measure it. In the late 1990s, Sarah Jane Blakemore and colleagues at University College London put people in brain scanners and had them touch their own arms. Then they had someone else touch the subjects in exactly the same way. Same pressure, same location, same everything. And they watched what happened in the somatosensory cortex, the part of your brain that processes touch. When someone else touched them, the somatosensory cortex lit up bright, strong activation. But when people touched themselves, the activation dropped by 30 to 40%. Same physical sensation, different brain response. Your brain was literally muting the experience of self-generated touch. Now, you might think this is just about touch, but it's not. Your brain does this with everything. When you speak, your auditory cortex suppresses the sound of your own voice. When you move your eyes, your visual cortex suppresses the blurry motion. When you shift your weight, your vestibular system cancels out the expected motion signals. Every action you take generates a prediction, and every expected consequence gets dampened. You see, your brain is not a passive receiver of information. It is a prediction machine. And this creates a problem. The problem is time. From the moment a photon hits your retina to the moment you become consciously aware of seeing something, approximately 80 to 100 milliseconds pass. That's how long it takes for signals to travel through your nervous system, for neurons to process information, for the experience to reach consciousness. The same delay exists for sound, touch, everything. Your conscious experience lags behind physical reality by about 1/10 of a second. Think about what this means. When you catch a ball, the ball you see is not where the ball actually is. It's where it was 80 milliseconds ago. When you have a conversation, the words you hear were spoken 80 milliseconds before you heard them. Everything you experience happened in the past. But you don't feel that delay, do you? When you catch a ball, you don't miss it by the distance it traveled in 80 milliseconds. When someone touches your arm, you don't feel it happening in the wrong place because you moved during the processing delay. Somehow, your experience feels immediate, synchronized, real-time. How? The answer is prediction. Your brain has learned, through a lifetime of movement and sensation, to predict the sensory consequences of your actions. It generates what neuroscientists call an efference copy, a copy of every motor command you send to your muscles. That copy goes to your cerebellum and other brain regions, and they use it to calculate what sensations should result. Then, crucially, they adjust your conscious experience to match the prediction instead of the delayed sensory input. You are not experiencing the world as it is. You're experiencing your brain's best guess about what the world is, based on slightly outdated information and predictions about what should be happening now. This is why you can't tickle yourself. When you try to tickle yourself, your brain predicts the exact sensation, timing, location, pressure, everything. And because the prediction matches the reality so precisely, your brain treats it as unimportant, expected, boring. It attenuates the sensation before it reaches consciousness. The tickle response requires surprise, unpredictability, something your brain didn't see coming, and you cannot surprise yourself. But here's where it gets interesting. In 1998, Sarah Jane Blakemore ran another experiment. She built a device with a clever feature. When you moved a lever with one hand, it would activate a tickler on your other hand, but with a time delay. She could adjust the delay from 0 milliseconds up to 300 milliseconds. At zero delay, immediate cause and effect, people couldn't tickle themselves. Their brains predicted the sensation perfectly. But as she increased the delay, something changed. At 100 milliseconds, people started to feel a little ticklish. At 200 milliseconds, more so. At 300 milliseconds, they could tickle themselves almost as effectively as another person could. Think about what this means. By introducing a time delay between action and sensation, she broke the brain's predictive model. The cerebellum predicted a sensation at one time, but it arrived at a different time. The mismatch meant the sensation wasn't fully expected anymore. It contained an element of surprise. And surprise is what the tickle response is designed to detect. This tells us something profound about how your brain constructs experience. The delay didn't change the physical sensation, the same mechanical stimulation of the same nerve endings. What changed was whether your brain predicted it accurately. And that prediction, not the physical reality, determined what you consciously experienced. Now, this gets to something very deep about the nature of consciousness and reality. There are parts of your body you cannot see. The back of your neck, most of your back, the soles of your feet when you're standing. Your brain has no direct visual information about these areas in real time. And yet, if I ask you where your hand is right now, you know. Even with your eyes closed, you have a sense of where your limbs are in space. We call this proprioception. But proprioception has the same delay problem as vision. The signals from your muscles and joints take time to reach your brain, and yet you don't feel that delay. When you reach for a coffee cup, your hand goes exactly where you intended, not where it was 80 milliseconds ago when the position signals were sent. Your brain is continuously predicting where your limbs are, updating that prediction faster than the sensory signals arrive, and presenting you with a coherent experience of a body in space that feels immediate. The body you experience is a simulation running slightly ahead of the sensory evidence. And you know what? This system can be fooled. There's an experiment called the rubber hand illusion, discovered by Jonathan Cohen and colleagues in 1998. Here's how it works. You sit at a table with your real hand hidden from view and a rubber hand visible in front of you. An experimenter strokes both hands simultaneously with a paintbrush, your real hand, which you can't see, and the rubber hand, which you can see. After about 30 seconds of this synchronized stroking, something strange happens. You start to feel like the rubber hand is your hand. When the experimenter strokes the rubber hand, you feel it. If someone threatens the rubber hand with a knife, you flinch. Your brain has integrated the rubber hand into its body model because the visual information and the touch information match. But here's the crucial part. If the stroking is not synchronized, if there's even a half-second delay between the visual stroke and the felt stroke, the illusion doesn't work. Your brain's predictive model requires the timing to match. When it doesn't, your brain knows something is wrong. Your experience of having a body, of being located in space, of ownership over your limbs, all of this is a prediction your brain is constantly making and updating. And that prediction can be manipulated. Let me tell you what this reveals about the nature of reality as you experience it. You probably think you experience the world directly. Light hits your eyes, sound hits your ears, pressure hits your skin, and you perceive these things as they are. But that's not what's happening. What's happening is your brain receives delayed, noisy, incomplete sensory data and uses it to update a model, a simulation of what it predicts is out there. What you experience is not reality. It's your brain's best guess about reality. And this is not some theoretical idea. This happens. We can measure it, we can manipulate it, we can break the prediction and watch your conscious experience change even though the physical stimulus stays the same. Now, you might be thinking, okay, fine, there's a delay, but 80 milliseconds is such a short time. Does it really matter? Well, think about this. You're driving a car at highway speed, say 100 kilometers per hour. That's about 28 meters per second. In 80 milliseconds, your car travels about 2.2 meters, more than 2 meters. If you were reacting to the road as it was 80 milliseconds ago, you'd be constantly crashing into things that moved, constantly misjudging distances, constantly out of sync with reality. But you're not. You drive just fine, because your brain is not showing you where things were. It's showing you where it predicts they are now. The same thing happens in sports. A baseball pitched at 150 kilometers per hour covers about 1.1 meters in 80 milliseconds. If a batter were swinging at where they saw the ball 80 milliseconds ago, they would miss every time. But they don't. Their brain predicts the ball's trajectory and times the swing based on that prediction, not the delayed visual information. You are constantly living in a predicted present, not an actual present. And here's where people get confused. They say, well, if my brain is predicting everything, how do I ever experience anything unexpected? How do I ever get surprised? Good question. The answer is that your brain only predicts the consequences of your own actions, things you control. When you move your hand, your cerebellum knows you're moving it, so it predicts the resulting sensations. But when someone else moves your hand, there's no motor command, no efference copy, no prediction. The sensation arrives unexpected, and your brain treats it as important, novel, worth paying attention to. This is why other people can tickle you, but you cannot tickle yourself. Their actions are unpredictable to your brain, yours are not. But this creates a very interesting philosophical situation. It means that the vividness of your experience, what feels real and immediate and important, depends not on the physical intensity of the stimulus, but on whether your brain predicted it. Expected sensations get muted. Unexpected sensations get amplified. Your conscious experience is not a faithful representation of the world. It's a filtered, predicted, constructed representation designed to highlight what matters. And what matters, from your brain's perspective, is anything it didn't predict, anything unexpected. Because unexpected things might be important. They might be threats, opportunities, information worth updating your model of the world. Now, this predictive mechanism operates completely below conscious awareness. You do not decide to generate predictions. You do not feel your cerebellum computing expected sensory consequences. It just happens automatically, constantly, for every movement you make. Neuroscientists have mapped out some of the brain regions involved. The cerebellum, obviously, which contains more neurons than the rest of your brain combined and seems specialized for this kind of predictive computation. The somatosensory cortex, which processes touch, the anterior cingulate cortex, which seems to compare predictions to reality and signal when there's a mismatch. Probably other regions we haven't fully identified yet, but the important thing is this. This is not a bug. This is not your brain making a mistake. This is fundamental to how your brain works. Prediction is not something your brain does sometimes. It is what your brain does constantly to construct your experience of reality. You know, this connects to something very deep about the nature of consciousness. There's a question philosophers have argued about for centuries. How do we know that what I experience as red is the same as what you experience as red? Maybe your red is my blue. We'd never know because we both learned to call the same wavelength of light red. But our private experiences might be completely different. And the usual answer is, well, we can't know. Subjective experience is private, inaccessible to outside observation. But here's the thing. If your experience of red is a prediction, your brain is making based on certain wavelengths of light hitting your retina. And my experience of red is a prediction my brain is making based on the same wavelengths hitting my retina, and both our brains are making these predictions using similar neural machinery shaped by similar evolutionary pressures. then probably our experiences are at least similar. Not because we have access to some objective redness out there in the world, but because our brains are running similar predictive models. Your experience is a simulation. My experience is a simulation. And the simulations are probably pretty similar because they're generated by similar processes for similar purposes. Think about that. Now let me tell you about something else this explains. You've probably noticed that when you try to tap your finger in rhythm, you can do it pretty accurately. You can keep a beat. But if you try to estimate how long a minute is without counting, just by feeling the passage of time, you're terrible at it. Most people are off by 20, 30, sometimes 50%. Why? Because your brain's predictive model is very good at predicting the immediate consequences of your actions, what happens in the next few hundred milliseconds, but it's not good at predicting things outside that window. Time estimation over longer periods requires a different mechanism, one that's less accurate, more susceptible to distortion. The present moment that your brain predicts is very short, a few hundred milliseconds at most. Beyond that, you're not experiencing a predicted present. You're remembering the recent past or anticipating the near future, which are different cognitive processes with different characteristics. This is why time seems to drag when you're bored and fly when you're engaged. It's why a watched pot never boils. Your subjective experience of time passing is not a faithful representation of clock time. It's a constructed experience that depends on how much your brain is updating its predictions, how much new information it's processing, how engaged your predictive machinery is. And here's something practical that comes out of this. People with certain neurological conditions have impaired predictive processing. People with schizophrenia, for instance, often experience self-generated sensations as externally caused. They might hear their own inner speech as voices coming from outside. Their own thoughts feel alien, inserted by someone else. What seems to happen is that their brains fail to properly predict the sensory consequences of their own mental actions. When they think a thought, the brain doesn't recognize it as self-generated because the prediction mechanism is broken, so it gets interpreted as coming from outside. There's some evidence that this is related to abnormalities in the cerebellum and in the connections between motor planning regions and sensory regions. The efference copy system doesn't work properly, so predictions don't match reality, and the brain misattributes the source of sensations, which tells us something important. Your sense of agency, your feeling that you are the author of your own actions and thoughts, depends on your brain's ability to predict the consequences of those actions. When prediction works, you feel in control. When it breaks, you feel controlled. The boundary between self and world, between actions you cause and events that happen to you, is constructed by your brain's predictive machinery. It's not a given. It's something your brain has to actively maintain, and it can go wrong. Now, you might wonder, if my brain is always predicting, always running ahead of sensory input, does that mean I ever experience actual reality? Or am I always living in a prediction? That's a deep question. The answer depends on what you mean by reality. If you mean the physical world as it actually is, independent of any observer, then no, you never experience that directly. You can't. The speed of neurotransmission, the time required for processing, the architecture of your brain, all of this imposes a delay and a filter between physical events and conscious experience. What you experience is your brain's model of reality, updated continuously based on sensory evidence, but always lagging slightly behind, always filtered through predictions about what should be happening. But here's the thing, that model is not arbitrary, it's constrained by physical reality. When your predictions are wrong, when reality violates your expectations, your brain notices. It updates the model. Over time, through this constant process of prediction and correction, your model becomes increasingly accurate. Not perfect, but good enough to catch balls, avoid dangers, navigate the world. You are experiencing a simulation, yes, but it's a simulation that tracks reality closely enough to keep you alive. And you know what? That's beautiful. Your brain, this 3-pound lump of fat and protein, has learned to construct a real-time simulation of the world, predict how it will change, and present you with a coherent experience that feels immediate even though it's always slightly in the past. That's an extraordinary achievement of biological computation. The fact that you can tickle yourself is a tiny window into this massive continuous process that underlies every moment of your conscious life. Your brain is hiding the delay from you, smoothing over the gaps, filling in the blanks, predicting the immediate future so convincingly that you never notice you're living in a simulation. Until someone points it out. Now, there are still things nobody understands about this. How does the brain combine predictions from different sensory modalities, sight and sound and touch, into a single coherent experience? How does it arbitrate when predictions conflict? How much of your experience is prediction versus sensory input? What happens in the brain during the 80 millisecond delay that transforms neural activity into conscious experience? Nobody knows. We're still figuring this out. But we know enough to say this much. What you think is the present moment happening right now is actually a prediction your brain made based on slightly outdated information. The world you see, the body you feel, the location of your limbs in space, all of it is a simulation running slightly ahead of the evidence. And the reason you can't tickle yourself is that your brain predicted the sensation so accurately that it didn't bother to make you conscious of it. You are not experiencing reality directly. You are experiencing your brain's best guess about reality. And your brain is hiding this from you because an accurate, coherent simulation is more useful than a delayed, fragmented stream of raw sensory data. Think about what this means. Every conversation you have, every sunset you watch, every person you touch, you are experiencing all of it through a predictive filter that operates below your awareness. You have never experienced the actual present moment. You have only ever experienced your brain's prediction of what the present moment should be. And that, I think, is one of the most beautiful and unsettling discoveries neuroscience has given us. The present is a prediction. The self is a simulation, and reality, as you experience it, is something your brain is constantly constructing, 80 milliseconds behind the world, trying its best to catch up. That is how it works. That is what your brain is doing right now as you hear these words. Predicting what comes next. Updating its model. Presenting you with an experience that feels immediate, but is actually a sophisticated guess about what's happening slightly in the future based on information from slightly in the past. You can't tickle yourself because you can't surprise a prediction machine with its own predictions, and you can't escape living in a predicted present because that's what consciousness is. A model, a simulation, a best guess, running continuously your entire life, constructing the reality you think you're experiencing directly. And we are only just beginning to understand how it works.